The thunderous boom of a shotgun rang out across the empty plain, making the train shudder to a sudden halt. Clara Ashford clutched her leather-bound journal to her chest as panicked whispers rippled through the passenger car of the Southern Pacific Railroad. It was 1878, and the promise of a new life in San Francisco had drawn her west from Boston, but now, that journey had come to an unexpected standstill somewhere in the vast Nevada desert. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conductor announced, his voice trembling slightly as he adjusted his gold-buttoned uniform. "I regret to inform you that there appears to be damage to the tracks ahead. We'll be delayed until repairs can be made or assistance arrives." Clara pressed her face against the dusty window, seeing nothing but endless sagebrush and distant mountains shimmering in the afternoon heat. The train had stopped in what truly seemed the middle of nowhere, no town, no station, nothing but wilderness for miles around. "How long will we be stranded here?" a portly businessman demanded, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "Impossible to say, sir. Could be hours, could be days." A collective groan rose from the passengers. Clara's heart sank. She had exactly $23 to her name, barely enough to secure lodging when she reached California. She certainly couldn't afford to be delayed, especially not out here where the desert sun seemed determined to bake them alive inside the increasingly stifling car. Hours passed. The heat grew unbearable as the sun beat down on the metal roof of the train. Water rations were distributed, but it was clear they wouldn't last long. Clara's cotton traveling dress clung to her skin, damp with perspiration, as she fanned herself with the pages of her journal. By evening, the situation had grown dire. No repair crew had arrived, and there was talk of bandits in the area. The conductor had advised everyone to stay aboard, but the air inside the train had become nearly unbreathable. Clara needed fresh air. Ignoring the warnings, she slipped outside onto the narrow metal steps of the passenger car. The desert had cooled somewhat with the setting sun, and she breathed deeply, grateful for the relief. That's when she saw him. A lone rider approached from the east, his silhouette unmistakable against the purple-hued horizon. Broad-shouldered and straight-backed in the saddle, he rode with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. As he drew closer, details emerged: a weather-worn Stetson, a bandana tied loosely around his neck, and a gun belt that had clearly seen use. Clara retreated slightly into the doorway of the car as the stranger reined his horse to a stop beside the locomotive. She watched as he exchanged words with the engineer, gesturing toward the distant mountains. Though she couldn't hear their conversation, there was something reassuring about the man's calm demeanor. The conductor hurried past Clara, nearly knocking her over in his haste to reach the newcomer. Minutes later he returned, his face grave. "The track's been sabotaged," he announced to the anxious passengers. "Likely the work of the Donovan gang. They've been terrorizing this stretch for months." A woman began to weep softly. A father pulled his children closer. "What's to be done?" Clara asked, finding her voice. "The gentleman outside is Isaac Lawson, a rancher from these parts. He's offered to guide anyone willing to the nearest settlement, a place called Keeler over the state line in California. It's about a 2-day ride. The company will send men to repair the tracks, but it could be a week or more before we're moving again." Murmurs of concern rippled through the car. A week stranded in the desert. Clara's meager supplies wouldn't last 3 days. "I'm going," she declared, surprising even herself with her certainty. The conductor looked at her dubiously. "Miss, it's dangerous country. Mr. Lawson says he can only take a few people, those most in need of getting to civilization. The rest should stay with the train where it's safer." "I have pressing business in California," Clara insisted, though in truth She had only the promise of a teaching position that might not wait for her delayed arrival. "And I cannot afford to be delayed," the conductor sighed. "Very well. Gather only what you absolutely need. You leave at first light." Clara spent the night making preparations, packing only her most essential belongings into a small carpet bag. As the first pale light of dawn crept across the desert floor, she joined the small group assembling outside the train: an elderly man with a persistent cough who needed medical attention, a pregnant woman traveling to meet her husband, and a young bank clerk with important documents to deliver. Isaac Lawson looked even more imposing in the clear light of morning. Tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and piercing blue eyes, he assessed the small party with a critical gaze. His dark hair, slightly too long, curled at the edges of his hat. Clara guessed him to be in his early 30s, with the weathered face of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. "I've got 2 spare horses," he explained, his voice a deep rumble that matched his appearance. "The older gentleman and the expectant mother will ride. The rest of us will have to alternate walking." Clara nodded, adjusting her wide-brimmed bonnet against the already strengthening sun. She'd abandoned her proper traveling ensemble for her simplest skirt and blouse, but even these felt impractical for the journey ahead. "Miss," Isaac addressed her directly, his eyes taking her measure, "have you ever ridden Western before?" "I rode English style as a girl," Clara replied, lifting her chin slightly. "I'm sure I can manage." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We'll see. Stay close, follow my lead, and don't wander. There are more dangers out here than just the heat." With that, he helped the elderly man onto one of the spare horses and the pregnant woman onto another. The bank clerk, a nervous young man named Thompson, would walk first, alongside Isaac, who led his own impressive Palomino stallion. "You'll ride with me, Miss Ashford," Isaac said, extending a hand to Clara. "At least until we're clear of this exposed area." Before she could protest, he swung her effortlessly up into his saddle, then mounted behind her in a smooth motion that spoke of years of practice. Clara went rigid as his arms came around her to take the reins, acutely aware of the impropriety of their position. Yet as they set off at a steady pace, leaving the stranded train behind, she found herself grateful for the secure seat and the knowledge that someone competent was guiding their small party to safety. The morning passed in relative silence, broken only by Isaac's occasional directions or warnings about the terrain. By midday, the sun was merciless, beating down on them from a cloudless sky. They stopped in the shadow of a large rock formation, and Isaac distributed water from his canteen. "Drink sparingly," he cautioned. "We'll reach a spring by nightfall, but we need to make what we have last." Clara accepted the canteen, trying not to think about the fact that his lips had touched it moments before. The water was warm but heavenly on her parched throat. "You're not what I expected, Miss Ashford," Isaac remarked as he repacked the canteen. "Oh, and what did you expect, Mr. Lawson? Most Eastern ladies I've encountered would be complaining bitterly by now. You haven't uttered a word of complaint despite the heat and discomfort." Clara smiled slightly. "I save my complaints for matters that can be remedied. The desert heat is beyond anyone's control." Isaac studied her with newfound interest. "A practical philosophy. Where are you headed in California, if you don't mind my asking?" "San Francisco." "I've accepted a position teaching at a girls' academy." He nodded. "A teacher. That explains the composure. You're used to maintaining dignity in challenging circumstances." Clara laughed for the first time since the journey began. "You have a generous view of schoolrooms, Mr. Lawson." "But yes, I suppose teaching third-grade arithmetic does prepare one for certain hardships." Their brief rest ended too soon. Isaac helped Clara back onto his horse, but this time he led the animal on foot, allowing the bank clerk a turn to ride one of the spare mounts. The pregnant woman, Mrs. Winters, was showing signs of fatigue, her face flushed despite the shade of her bonnet. "How much farther to this spring?" Clara asked quietly as she walked alongside Isaac for a stretch. "About 5 more hours at this pace," he replied. "Are you holding up all right?" "Yes, though I'm concerned about Mrs. Winters." Isaac glanced at the pregnant woman. "So am I. We'll stop more frequently for her sake, but we need to reach water before nightfall." The afternoon dragged on endlessly. The landscape remained starkly beautiful but unforgiving, rolling hills covered in sagebrush, occasional rock formations thrusting up from the earth, and always the distant mountains that never seemed to get any closer. Clara's feet developed blisters inside her impractical town boots, but she gritted her teeth and continued without complaint. It was nearly dusk when Isaac suddenly tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. He scanned the horizon with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" Clara whispered, sensing his alarm. "Dust cloud southwest," he murmured. "Could be nothing. Could be trouble." He quickly reorganized their party, helping Clara back onto his horse and instructing everyone to move at a faster pace. The spring, he explained, was just beyond the next ridge in a small protected canyon. "If it's the Donovan gang, they'll have spotted us already," he told Clara as they rode. "But they might not bother with such a small party unless they think we're carrying valuables." "Are they truly so dangerous?" she asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "3 men killed on the stage to Reno last month," he replied grimly. "They don't leave witnesses." Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. The tranquil desert suddenly seemed filled with hidden threats. She felt Isaac's arm tighten slightly around her waist as he urged his horse to a faster trot. They reached the canyon just as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing everything in a brief, spectacular crimson glow before darkness began to settle. The spring was a small but precious oasis, a clear pool of water surrounded by cottonwood trees and thick vegetation that seemed miraculous after the day's journey through barren terrain. Isaac helped everyone dismount, then quickly set about making camp with practiced efficiency. He built a small, nearly smokeless fire in a stone-lined pit that suggested he'd used this spot before. "We won't risk a larger fire tonight," he explained as he helped Mrs. Winters to a comfortable spot near the warmth. "If those riders are looking for us, no sense in providing a beacon." The elderly gentleman, Mr. Peterson, had been silent most of the journey, conserving his strength. Now he spoke, his voice thin but determined. "Should we post a watch, Mr. Lawson?" Isaac nodded. "I'll take first watch. Mr. Thompson can relieve me midway through the night." "I can take a turn as well," Clara offered. Isaac looked at her with surprise. "That won't be necessary, Miss Ashford." "I'm perfectly capable of staying awake and sounding an alarm if needed," she insisted. "We should all do our part." After a moment's hesitation, Isaac nodded. "Very well. You can take the pre-dawn watch. It's usually the quietest." They ate a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and dried fruit from Isaac's provisions. The spring provided blessed fresh water, and everyone's spirits lifted somewhat after drinking and washing the worst of the desert dust from their faces and hands. As the others settled for sleep, wrapped in blankets Isaac had brought, Clara found herself too alert to rest. She sat near the fire, watching Isaac as he methodically cleaned his revolver. "Have you lived in this territory long?" she asked softly, mindful of the others trying to sleep nearby. "Born in Missouri, but I've been out here almost 15 years, he replied, his hands never pausing in their work. "Got a small ranch about 30 miles northeast of Keeler." Is ranching profitable in such harsh country? The question earned her another of his rare smiles. Not particularly, but it's a living. The land's not as harsh as it seems once you learn its ways. And have you learned its ways, Mr. Lawson? His blue eyes met hers across the fire. Some of them. Others still surprise me. The desert keeps its secrets. There was something in his tone that suggested he was speaking of more than just the land. Clara found herself curious about this solitary man who had appeared like a guardian angel when they needed one most. "You often rescue stranded travelers?" she asked. "When I can. I was heading to Keeler anyway when I spotted the train." He reassembled his revolver with swift, practiced movements. "You should try to sleep, Miss Ashford. Tomorrow will be another long day." Recognizing the gentle dismissal, Clara nodded and settled onto her blanket. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every sound of the desert night startled her awake: the distant howl of coyotes, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, the occasional snort of the horses. During one such wakeful moment, she noticed Isaac standing at the edge of their camp, a silhouette against the star-filled sky. There was something in his posture of vigilance, a readiness that both reassured and intrigued her. What kind of life had shaped a man to be so perpetually on guard? When Isaac gently shook her awake for her watch, the eastern sky held just the faintest hint of approaching dawn. He instructed her on what to listen for and what to do if she spotted anything unusual, then settled nearby, not fully relinquishing his vigilance even in rest. "I'll be right here," he assured her. "Wake me at the first sign of trouble." The pre-dawn watch passed uneventfully. Clara found a strange peace in the silent desert, watching as the stars gradually faded and the landscape began to take shape in the growing light. By the time the sun crested the horizon, everyone was awake and preparing for the day's journey. "We should reach Keeler by late afternoon if we maintain a good pace," Isaac informed them as they ate a quick breakfast. "There's a decent hotel there where you all can rest while arrangements are made to continue your journeys." Clara noticed that Mrs. Winters looked pale and unsteady. "Are you feeling well?" she asked, moving to the woman's side. "Just tired," Mrs. Winters replied, but her voice was strained, and perhaps a bit feverish. Isaac joined them, concern evident in his expression as he noted Mrs. Winters' condition. He placed a gentle hand on her forehead. "You're burning up," he said grimly. "We need to get you to a doctor." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I can't delay you all. Your baby needs you healthy," Isaac said firmly. "We'll make better time today. I know this country well enough to take some shortcuts, though they're a bit rougher going." They broke camp quickly after that, with Isaac arranging for Mrs. Winters to ride his own horse, which he deemed the steadiest. He would lead it personally, while Clara and the others took turns with the 2 spare mounts. The second day's journey proved even more challenging than the first. The shortcuts Isaac had mentioned involved narrow passes through rocky terrain where they had to proceed in single file, sometimes leading the horses through particularly difficult sections. The heat seemed even more intense, and water had to be carefully rationed despite everyone's thirst. By midday, when they stopped briefly in the shade of a canyon wall, Clara was exhausted but determined not to show it. She helped distribute the remaining food while Isaac scouted ahead to ensure their path was clear. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Riders following our trail," he announced quietly, 4 of them moving fast. Mr. Peterson's weathered face paled beneath his sunburn. "The Donovans. Can't be certain, but I'd wager on it," Isaac replied. "They're maybe 2 hours behind us. Can we outrun them?" Thompson asked, his voice cracking with fear. Isaac shook his head. "Not with Mrs. Winters in her condition, and they'd just run us down in the open anyway." He was silent for a moment, considering their limited options. "There's an old line shack about an hour ahead." Not much, but it has thick walls and only 2 windows. We might have a better chance there." "A chance at what?" Clara asked, though she feared she knew the answer. Isaac's blue eyes were steady as they met hers. "A chance at surviving long enough for help to arrive. Keeler's not far beyond. If one of us could break away, reach the town." "I'll go," Thompson volunteered immediately, surprising everyone with his sudden courage. But Isaac shook his head. "No offense, Mr. Thompson, but you don't know this country. You'd be spotted and cut down before you made 5 miles. He turned to Clara. "Miss Ashford, how good are you at following directions?" Clara's heart leapt into her throat. "You want me to go? You're lighter than any of us men, and you've shown good sense. If I give you my fastest horse and clear instructions, could you make it to Keeler and bring back help?" The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. 4 lives might depend on her success. "Yes," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I can do it." Isaac nodded once, decision made. "Let's move to the line shack first. I'll draw you a map there and give you the best chance possible." They traveled in tense silence for the next hour, every crunch of gravel beneath their feet seeming to announce their presence to the pursuers. The line shack appeared suddenly around a bend in the canyon, a small, weathered structure of logs and stone that had clearly stood against the desert elements for decades. Inside, it was sparse but defensible, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and little else. Isaac immediately set about preparing, moving the table to block one window and checking the perimeter while the others settled Mrs. Winters as comfortably as possible. "Here," Isaac said, pulling Clara aside. He quickly sketched a map on a scrap of paper. "Follow this arroyo north for about 2 miles, then cut east at this rock formation that looks like a sleeping bear. Keeler is another 3 miles beyond. Ride hard and don't stop for anything." Clara studied the map, committing it to memory. "What if they spot me leaving?" "They won't," Isaac said with grim certainty, "because I'll be creating a distraction." He handed her his revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" Clara took the weapon, surprised by its weight. "My father taught me the basics, though it's been years. It's loaded with 6 rounds. Use them only if absolutely necessary." He hesitated, then added, "If you encounter anyone on the trail, don't trust them immediately, even if they seem helpful." The gravity of the situation washed over Clara anew. "You're placing a great deal of faith in someone you've known for less than 2 days, Mr. Lawson." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm a fair judge of character, Miss Ashford. You have courage and determination I recognized at the moment you volunteered to leave that train." Their eyes held for a moment, and Clara felt a peculiar flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "I won't let you down," she promised. "I know you won't." He glanced outside, gauging the sun's position. "We'll wait 30 more minutes, then you'll slip out the back while I fire a few shots from the front. With any luck, they'll focus on us and miss your departure entirely." The 30 minutes passed with excruciating slowness. Clara changed into a pair of trousers that Isaac had in his saddlebag, scandalous attire for a lady, but practical for hard riding. Mrs. Winters helped her tuck her hair up under a spare hat, completing the disguise that might help her pass as a young man from a distance. When the moment came, Isaac placed his hands on Clara's shoulders. "Ride like the devil himself is chasing you," he told her quietly, and Clara. It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Stay alive." With a nod, she slipped out the back of the shack, mounting the palomino that Isaac had prepared for her. The moment she heard gunshots from the front of the building, she dug her heels into the horse's flanks and galloped away, following the arroyo as instructed. The powerful horse responded beautifully, eating up the distance with long, smooth strides. Clara leaned low over its neck, her heart pounding in time with the animal's hoofbeats. Behind her, more gunshots echoed, and she fought the urge to look back. She found the bear-shaped rock formation easily enough and turned east as instructed. The terrain became rougher here, forcing her to slow slightly to navigate safely. Every moment seemed precious, every delay potentially fatal for those she'd left behind. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when she finally spotted Keeler in the distance, a small collection of buildings shimmering in the late afternoon heat. Relief surged through her, giving her a fresh burst of energy to urge the tired horse forward. Keeler proved to be a typical frontier town, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a couple of saloons, a general store, and various other establishments necessary for survival in the territory. Clara rode directly to the sheriff's office, drawing curious stares from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing a woman in men's clothing astride a fine horse. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Beckett, listened to her breathless explanation with growing alarm. "The Donovans," he muttered, reaching for his gun belt. "Been trying to catch those boys for months." He quickly organized a posse of 6 men, all heavily armed and mounted on fresh horses. Clara insisted on accompanying them, despite the sheriff's objections. "Madam, this is likely to be dangerous business," he warned. "Those people risked their lives to give me this chance," Clara replied firmly. "And Mr. Lawson's horse knows the way better than any map I could draw you." Reluctantly, the sheriff agreed, though he insisted she remain at a safe distance when they approached the line shack. They rode out immediately, pushing their horses as hard as they dared in the fading light. Night had fallen completely by the time they neared the canyon where the line shack stood. They approached cautiously, without lights, guided by the bright desert stars and the Palomino's unerring sense of direction. From a distance, they could see the flicker of firelight through the single unblocked window of the shack. Outside, 4 horses were tethered nearby horses that didn't belong to Isaac's party. "The Donovans are still there," the sheriff whispered as they gathered behind a ridge. "Looks like they've got your friends pinned down but haven't stormed the place yet." "Are they alive?" Clara asked, her voice tight with fear. "No way to tell from here. We'll spread out, take them by surprise." The sheriff gave quiet orders to his men, who moved into position with practiced efficiency. Clara was instructed to remain behind the ridge, well out of danger. For 10 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then the night exploded with gunfire. Clara couldn't see much of the battle from her position, just flashes of gunfire and shadowy figures moving in the darkness. She heard shouts, more shots, then a period of silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Finally, a voice called out the sheriff's. "Miss Ashford, it's safe now." She urged her horse forward, heart in her throat as she approached the line shack. 4 bodies lay on the ground outside the Donovan gang, she presumed. The sheriff's men were securing the scene, checking the fallen men for signs of life. Clara dismounted and rushed to the shack. The door opened before she reached it, and Isaac stepped out, a bloodied bandage around his left arm but very much alive. Behind him, she could see the others, Mr. Peterson looking exhausted but unharmed, Thompson wide-eyed with relief, and Mrs. Winters propped against the wall, pale but conscious. "You made it," Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promised I wouldn't let you down," Clara replied, fighting the unexpected urge to throw herself into his arms. The journey back to Keeler was slow but triumphant. Mrs. Winters was placed in a wagon the posse had brought along, with Mr. Peterson keeping her company. The sheriff and his deputies transported the bodies of 3 Donovan gang members, while the 4th, only wounded, was bound and placed under guard. Clara rode beside Isaac, who insisted he was perfectly capable of sitting a horse despite his injury. In the quiet darkness, with the others at a distance, they spoke in low voices. "You're a remarkable woman, Clara Ashford," Isaac said, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Most people I know would have been halfway to California by now, putting this whole ordeal behind them." "I couldn't abandon you, any of you," she replied simply. "Not when you risked your life for us. Is your teaching position time-sensitive? Will they hold it if you're delayed?" Clara considered this. "The term doesn't begin for another month. I was traveling early to settle in and prepare." She glanced at him curiously. "Why do you ask?" Isaac was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "I was thinking you might consider staying in Keeler a while, at least until Mrs. Winters delivers her baby safely. She's taken a shine to you, and frankly, there's no proper doctor in town. Your practical nature would be invaluable. And what would I do in Keeler all that time?" "Well," he said, a hint of his rare smile appearing, "I happen to know the school teacher retired last month. The children are running wild without instruction. It would be temporary, of course, just until you need to continue to San Francisco." Clara laughed softly. "Mr. Lawson, are you offering me employment?" "The town would compensate you fairly," he assured her. "And—" He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation, "I have a spare cabin on my property, suitable for a single lady. Perfectly proper with my housekeeper, Mrs. Gunderson, in the main house to maintain appearances. If you wanted to experience ranch life while you're here." The offer hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Clara studied his profile in the darkness. This man who had appeared in her life so suddenly and changed it so completely in just 2 days. "I'll consider it," she said finally, knowing in her heart that her decision was already made. Keeler welcomed them as heroes. The town doctor, an elderly man with limited skills but a kind manner, immediately tended to Mrs. Winters and Isaac's wounded arm. Mr. Peterson's persistent cough was diagnosed as a minor respiratory infection, easily treated with proper rest and medication. Thompson telegraphed his bank to explain the delay and received permission to remain until the train was repaired. Clara found herself the subject of much attention and admiration. The story of her ride for help spread quickly, embellished with each telling until she scarcely recognized her own actions. The hotel's proprietor insisted she stay free of charge for as long as she wished, and the town council formally offered her the temporary teaching position that Isaac had mentioned. 3 days after their arrival, with her decision to remain in Keeler at least temporarily finalized, Clara found herself sitting on the hotel's front porch in the cool evening air. She had written to the San Francisco Academy, explaining her delay and requesting that they hold her position if possible, but informing them that she had accepted temporary employment in the interim. Isaac appeared at the bottom of the steps, his wounded arm in a sling but otherwise looking much recovered. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, wearing clean clothes and with his dark hair neatly combed. "Miss Ashford," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I hope I find you well this evening." "Mr. Lawson," she replied with a smile, "I'm very well, thank you. Please join me." He settled into the chair beside hers, placing his hat on his knee. "I understand you've accepted the teaching position. Word travels quickly in small towns." "That it does." He gazed out at the main street where the day's activities were winding down as shopkeepers closed up and saloon lights began to glow more brightly. "Have you given any thought to my other offer? The cabin, I mean." Clara had indeed thought of little else. "It's very generous. But I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition. The cabin's sitting empty and it's more comfortable than the hotel for an extended stay." He glanced at her, and I thought perhaps you might appreciate seeing something of ranch life while you're here. Are you trying to convert me to the Western way of living, Mr. Lawson? She asked, a teasing note in her voice. His expression grew more serious. I'm trying to show you possibilities you might not have considered, Miss Ashford. The weight of his words hung between them. Clara was no naive girl at 26. She understood perfectly what might be developing between them. A spark, kindled during danger, that could either fade or grow into something more substantial. I'll come see the cabin tomorrow, she decided. If it's suitable, I accept your offer of lodging provided Mrs. Gunderson has no objections to chaperoning a Boston schoolteacher. Isaac's smile was worth any risk the decision might entail. She'll be delighted. She's been trying to civilize me for years without success. A refined Eastern lady might finally give her hope for my redemption. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the deepening twilight. Clara felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years since before her parents' deaths had left her alone in the world, forced to make her own way with nothing but her education and determination. Tell me about your ranch, she requested. Isaac described it with evident pride: 500 acres of mostly grazing land, a modest herd of cattle, a few good horses he bred and trained, a small orchard that Mrs. Gunderson tended with religious devotion. It's not grand, he admitted, but it's mine, free and clear. Built it with my own hands after years working other men's land. It sounds wonderful, Clara said sincerely. I've lived in cities all my life. Open spaces still seem magical to me. They can also be harsh and unforgiving. He turned to face her fully. Clara, I want you to understand what you're stepping into. Life out here isn't easy, especially for someone accustomed to Eastern comforts. I'm tougher than I look, Mr. Lawson. Isaac, he corrected gently. I think we're well past formalities, don't you? Isaac, she repeated, enjoying the way his name felt on her lips. The following day, Isaac arrived with a buggy to transport Clara to his ranch. The drive took just over an hour, following a well-maintained road that wound through increasingly scenic country. As they crested a final hill, the Lawson Ranch spread before them, a neat collection of buildings nestled in a small valley, with mountains rising majestically behind. The main house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and sturdy chimney. Nearby stood a large barn, several corrals and various outbuildings necessary for ranch operations. A small creek meandered through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. It's beautiful, Clara said honestly as Isaac helped her down from the buggy. The cabin he'd mentioned stood about 200 yards from the main house, a charming one-room structure with its own small porch and garden plot. Inside, it was simple but comfortable, with a bed, table, chairs, and a small stove for cooking and heat. Mrs. Gunderson, a robust Norwegian woman with silver-streaked blonde hair and a no-nonsense manner, had clearly prepared for Clara's visit. The cabin was spotlessly clean, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in a mason jar on the table. It's perfect for my needs, Clara declared after inspecting the space. If you're certain I won't be in the way. You could never be in the way, Isaac assured her, his voice low enough that Mrs. Gunderson, busying herself with showing Clara the storage arrangements, couldn't hear. Clara moved to the cabin the next day, bringing her few possessions from the hotel. The town council had arranged for her to begin teaching the following Monday, giving her a few days to settle in and prepare. There were 23 children of various ages in need of education, ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Life quickly settled into a pleasant routine. Clara rode to town each weekday morning in the buggy Isaac provided, taught until mid-afternoon, then returned to the ranch. Evenings were often spent with Isaac and Mrs. Gunderson in the main house, sharing meals and conversation. On weekends, Isaac showed her the operations of the ranch, teaching her to ride Western style properly and introducing her to the basics of cattle management. Mrs. Winters remained in town under the doctor's care, improving steadily as her due date approached. Mr. Peterson, fully recovered, had continued his journey west, and Thompson had returned to his banking duties once the train was repaired. Clara maintained correspondence with all of them, forming friendships that transcended their brief shared ordeal. As weeks passed, Clara's understanding of ranch life deepened, as did her appreciation for Isaac's quiet competence and integrity. She watched him interact with his small crew of ranch hands, noting how they respected him without fear. She observed his patience with difficult animals, his generosity to neighbors in need, his fundamental decency in all dealings. For his part, Isaac found himself increasingly enchanted by Clara's quick intelligence, her adaptability, and her genuine interest in his world. He began finding reasons to spend more time with her, offering riding lessons she no longer needed, seeking her opinion on ranch improvements, bringing small gifts from town. One evening in late September, about 6 weeks after Clara's arrival, they rode to a high meadow on the ranch property to watch the sunset. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and pine from the mountains. "I received a letter from San Francisco today," Clara said as they sat side by side on a fallen log, their horses grazing nearby. Isaac's heart sank, though he kept his expression neutral. "The academy. Yes, they've held my position, as promised. They expect me by the 1st of November. The weight of unspoken things hung between them. Finally, Isaac turned to face her directly. "Clara, I'm not a man who speaks easily of feelings," he began, his deep voice unusually hesitant. "But I think you know what's in my heart." "Perhaps," she replied softly. "But I'd like to hear it nonetheless." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I've come to care for you deeply. These weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. The thought of you leaving—" He shook his head. "I don't want to imagine it." Clara's heart raced. "What are you proposing exactly?" "Stay," he said simply. "Not just temporarily, make a life here with me." "As your wife," she clarified, needing the words spoken plainly. "Yes." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I know it's sudden. I know you had plans, a career waiting. I can't offer you the culture or society of San Francisco. But I can promise to cherish you, to build a good life together, to be a partner worthy of your trust." Clara looked out over the ranch that had somehow become more home to her in 6 weeks than Boston had been in the years after her parents' deaths. She thought of her students in Keeler, already making remarkable progress under her guidance. She thought of Mrs. Gunderson's knowing smiles, of the community that had welcomed her so warmly. Most of all, she thought of Isaac, the man who had appeared like a guardian angel when she needed one most, who had shown her a life she'd never imagined for herself, but now couldn't imagine living without. "Yes," she said, turning back to him with a radiant smile. "Yes, I'll stay." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough to any doubts she might have harbored. He cupped her cheek gently, then leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss that promised commitment, passion, and partnership in equal measure. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in Keeler's small church, with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Winters, enormous with her imminent child, served as Clara's matron of honor. The sheriff stood as Isaac's best man. Mrs. Gunderson cried openly throughout the ceremony, while pretending to be merely adjusting her handkerchief. Clara wore a simple but elegant ivory dress ordered from Carson City, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Isaac, uncomfortable but handsome in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the county. When they finally returned to the ranch as husband and wife, Isaac carried Clara not to her cabin but across the threshold of the main house. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the parlor that had been transformed with fresh paint and new curtains preparations he had secretly made with Mrs. Gunderson's help. "It's perfect," Clara whispered, taking in the homey space that would now be truly hers. That night, they discovered the depth of their connection in the most intimate way possible, with tenderness, passion, and the profound trust that had grown between them since that first meeting beside a stranded train. In the months that followed, Clara continued teaching in Keeler while also embracing her role as a rancher's wife. She learned to manage household accounts, to preserve food for winter, to assist with calving when necessary. Isaac, in turn, supported her educational initiatives in town, helping to establish a small library and encouraging her to develop a more comprehensive curriculum. When Mrs. Winters gave birth to a healthy boy in November, she and her husband named him Isaac in honor of the man who had ensured both mother and child survived the journey. Clara found herself deeply moved by the gesture and increasingly drawn to the idea of starting a family of her own. Winter came to the high desert with surprising intensity, snowstorms that limited travel, frigid temperatures that required constant vigilance for the livestock. Clara discovered yet another side of ranch life, the hardships that tested even the most experienced ranchers. Yet she found beauty in the snow-covered landscape, joy in the cozy evenings by the fire with Isaac, and satisfaction in her growing competence. By spring, as the land reawakened with wildflowers and new growth, Clara had news of her own to share. On a warm April morning, as they sat on the porch watching dawn break over the mountains, she took Isaac's hand and placed it gently over her still flat stomach. "We'll be welcoming our own little cowboy or cowgirl come November," she told him, her heart full as she watched understanding dawn in his eyes. The wonder and love that illuminated his face told her everything she needed to know about the rightness of her choice all those months ago. When the train had stopped in the middle of nowhere, and a cowboy had offered his horse and protection, she could never have imagined where that journey would lead to a love as vast and enduring as the western landscape itself. As Isaac gathered her into his arms, murmuring words of joy and promise against her hair, Clara knew with absolute certainty that some derailments were actually destinations in disguise. Their daughter, Emma, was born on a snowy November night with Mrs. Gunderson and the town doctor in attendance. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, a combination that would serve her well in the life that stretched before her. As Clara held her newborn daughter while Isaac looked on with pride and tenderness, she reflected on the strange, wonderful path that had brought her here from a stranded passenger with uncertain prospects to a beloved wife, respected teacher, and now mother. "She's perfect," Isaac whispered, gently stroking his daughter's downy head. "She is," Clara agreed. "Our little miracle." In the years that followed, the Lawson family flourished alongside their ranch. Isaac's careful management and forward-thinking approaches to ranching brought increasing prosperity. Clara continued teaching until their second child, a son they named James, arrived 2 years after Emma. She then focused on establishing a proper school building in Keeler, serving on the board while raising their growing family. 2 more children completed their family, another son, William, and a final daughter, Sarah. The Lawson children grew up with the best of both worlds, their mother's love of learning and their father's connection to the land. The ranch expanded, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. The original cabin where Clara had first stayed became a schoolroom for the Lawson children, and others from neighboring ranches too distant from town for daily travel. Mrs. Gunderson remained with them until her peaceful passing at the age of 82, by which time Emma was old enough to help manage the household. The Norwegian woman had become like a grandmother to the Lawson children, imparting her wisdom, recipes, and no-nonsense approach to life that complemented Clara's more gentle guidance. Through it all, the inevitable hardships of ranch life, the joys of watching their children grow, the satisfaction of building something meaningful together, Clara and Isaac's partnership only strengthened. Their love, born in danger and nurtured through shared purpose, became the stable center around which their world revolved. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Isaac presented Clara with a gift, the deed to a small house in San Francisco. "For visits," he explained as she looked at him in surprise. "Emma's teaching at that girls' academy now, and I thought you might like to spend winters there sometimes, enjoying the culture you sacrificed to be with me." Clara placed the deed aside and took his hands in hers. "I sacrificed nothing," she told him with absolute conviction. "I gained everything, but I will enjoy visiting our daughter and experiencing the city with you by my side." As they stood on their porch that evening, watching their 3 younger children rounding up strays in the home pasture with the same skill Isaac had shown that first day beside the stranded train, Clara leaned against her husband's solid presence. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if that train hadn't broken down?" she asked. Isaac's arm tightened around her waist. "I thank God every day for sabotaged railroad tracks," he replied with the dry humor that still had the power to make her laugh after all these years. That night, as they lay together in the comfortable intimacy of long-married lovers, Clara reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. From a chance meeting in the desert to a life rich with purpose, love, and family, all because a train had stopped in the middle of nowhere, and a cowboy had offered his horse and protection. As Isaac's breathing deepened into sleep beside her, Clara whispered a prayer of gratitude for derailed plans and unexpected destinations, and for the courage to recognize when it appeared, the love of a lifetime.